it's only Wednesday, so my brain is also in another state like many of you. Of ecology and evolutionary biology at the University of Tucson, or Arizona in Tucson, and a member of the Cactus and Succulent Society of America Conservation Committee. Studying the impact of climate change on cacti, which is, as I'm sure some of us might be experiencing firsthand right now, a very important topic. If you have, saguaros losing limbs, etc., definitely, unfortunately, perhaps something that is becoming more to the forefront of all of our minds. So Mish became interested in cacti as a teenager in Belgium, where he had a small cactus collection, and then upon moving to Tucson in 2016, that collection, as I understand it, grew to immense proportions. And now, as of 2021, he has a conservation-focused cactus nursery, Prickly Prospects, the link to which I'll put in the chat. Also, I learned from looking at your website that agaves are part of the asparagus family. You learn something new every day. And so focusing on the ethical propagation of the most endangered species. And the purpose of this, of course, is to prevent people from wild harvesting. If you have access to it in a more ethical way, is wonderful. And so Misha is involved in conservation projects with the botanical gardens across the world and believes strongly in the importance of holistic conservation management, including both research in the field, as well as safeguarding the future of cacti by cultivating them. And while trying to avoid picking favorites, partial to columnar cacti, zillion species, and Opuntiads. So with that in mind, I will turn it over to you. Thank you again for being here. I'm very excited to hear you speak today.
Yeah, thank you, Jess. Yeah, and if anyone ever makes it to Tucson, I'm always happy to have folks over. So please do shoot me a message if you want to come look at the nursery. I haven't put anything new on the website in quite a while. Running behind a little bit, but yeah, please do reach out. I always love talking about plants. So let me screen share here. All right, there we go. Okay, so feel free to interrupt me at any time with questions. I like the fact that this is a little bit more informal, so please do interrupt me. So, yeah. Sorry. Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, we're good, Mish.
Okay. Yeah, so anything I'll be talking about today, for the most part, they just reflect my own opinions. I do need to make that absolutely clear that nothing I say will represent official IUCN positions or Desert Botanical Garden positions specifically. So conservation in the 21st century. With a lot of research, we've been able to establish what the historical rate is of extinction of species. And the extinction rate that we're currently experiencing in the 21st century is about 1,000 times higher than that background rate, as it's called. On top of that, estimates have been that 1 in 6 species are committed to extinction due to climate change. Not great. And as a result of that, the extinction rate may actually end up being 10,000 times higher than the background rate if we keep going the way that we are. And unfortunately, it doesn't look like that's changing very quickly. So what I'll be focusing on today is what I personally believe should be the new conservation paradigm for the future. So there's a lot of species out there that need conservation intervention. And of course, funding is very insufficient, especially if you're a cactus and not a rhinoceros. A little bit of a recap on cacti. There's about 1,855 species. That number goes up every month, without a doubt. The most recent taxonomy of the family you can find on this website, caryophyllales.org. And those species are distributed all across the New World. So all the way from southern Canada to Argentina. And to prove that to you, even though the public perception is that cacti like hot, dry deserts, this is what's called a Whittaker plot. And all these black dots are observations from the research database that I use. So each dot represents an occurrence of a cactus in the wild and what the temperature on the horizontal axis And then the precipitation on the vertical axis is in that region. And so the highest density of all these black points is definitely in drier areas, right? Bottom right has the highest density. So hot and dry. But every single biome, except for the tundra, has cacti in it. So even very wet tropical rainforests have cacti in them that are specifically adapted to those conditions. What they all have in common, though, is that cacti can deal with at least seasonally dry conditions. There's a very wide variety of growth forms that have evolved in response to those different environments. And so we have little globular cacti, like this Mammillaria herae from Mexico, a close relative of our pincushion cacti here in the US. Astrophytum asterias from Texas and northern Mexico, Texas star cactus, very beautiful species. Hedgehogs, like Echinocereus reichenbachii. Prickly pears, and prickly pears are everywhere. We do have a center of diversity for prickly pears here in the Southwest, but there's prickly pears even in the Galapagos. This is a Puntia echios from the Galapagos. And so when you hear about the Galapagos, people think about finches and tortoises and so on, but the same pattern of different species by islands is definitely the case for the prickly pears there as well. So this is one of my favorite groups. Some shorter shrubby cacti, like Borzicactus semiplatanus from South America. Very beautiful flowers. The diversity in flower morphology in cacti is pretty tremendous, very closely linked to its their pollinators. Micrantocereus alvinii, one of my favorites from Brazil. Another short columnar cactus. Then you have some interesting ones like the Ceres childsii, where we don't actually know where it comes from in the wild. So a very similar situation to aloe vera, where we don't know where the ancestor came from. That's the case for this species as well. And some more unusual looking ones like Zeabenthia verticulata from Brazil. Still has true leaves on it. Very nasty spines out of, even compared to teddy bear cholla, I'd much rather have a run-in with that, and I have, than with this plant. Fortunately, cacti are also highly threatened. 31% of species are considered threatened by the IUCN. And that percentage is higher than for mammals and birds. On top of that, a very large fraction of species are located outside of protected areas. So no coverage, no conservation coverage at all. And so this study in 2016, spearheaded by the IUCN Cactus Group, looked at the different threats to cacti in the wild and ranked them. And so on the left-hand side, you see agriculture and even aquaculture. There's a species in Baja that's threatened by shrimp farming. Next up is biological resource use, which can be legal, but also includes things like poaching, which I'll mention a little bit here today. Residential and commercial development, energy production, and so on. So those are the top threats. A study we completed last year, 2022, last year, was the impact of climate change on cacti. And that not much was known back in 2016 about how climate change is already and could affect cacti. But we found that 60% of species that we tested, and we looked at hundreds of species all across the Americas, are predicted to experience a reduction in range size. So their distribution will be shrinking due to climate change.
Is there any particular genus or group that you see that happening disproportionately?
There seems to be very little in the way of a pattern. That's something I'm looking at now. What specifically explains which species will suffer the most. The only pattern we've found so far is that epiphytic cacti, so cacti that grow on trees for the most part, those suffer the most. And one of those centers of diversity is in Brazil. I'll show some maps that show different patterns. But it's kind of all over the place. For the Southwest specifically, chollas do very poorly. but we'll get into that a little bit more. So pretty much everywhere, the makeup of cactus species that will do well or will do poorly is somewhat different. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution or answer to this problem. But back in 2016, climate change was ranked all the way at the bottom of these threats. And now if we use that 60% estimate, that would put it at the very top, unfortunately. And of course, most species on the planet are exposed to climate change. So as a species, how do you respond to that? Well, you can adapt, and that usually takes time. You need genetic diversity, you need to reproduce, natural selection needs to play out. And cacti, a lot of cacti aren't particularly well known for their speed of growth and reproduction. So that's a problem. But it's still a possibility for some species. They also go extinct. That's probably the least preferred solution. And something that I'm sure all everyone in Arizona, especially in Maricopa County, is aware of is that we're seeing a huge mortality event for swallows, and this is following reproductive failure the last few years. And so the Desert Botanical Garden has been getting a lot of emails and calls about, well, my swallow's dying. What do we do? And so the swallow census only typically takes place at certain times of the year. But right now, with everything that's happening, if you have a report about a dying swallow, we're very interested in knowing that to keep track and figure out what the cause might be. It likely has something to do with the fact that the nighttime temperatures just aren't dropping low enough, but it's too early to say. But please do send your reports to that email address down below here in the picture. But regardless of this, it is absolutely certain that in even a couple decades from now, we will not be growing the same species that we are right now. For some of them, it will simply not be possible. The last possible response to climate change is what's called climatic niche tracking. And so climatic niche is just a fancy word for the environmental conditions, the climatic conditions that a species can tolerate, that it likes, that it grows in. Tracking just means keeping up with that climatic niche. So due to climate change, the specific environment, specific climate that species like is moving geographically. So in the Northern Hemisphere, the regions where it's the same temperature that you're used to will generally move north. If you're on a mountain, then those conditions will typically move up. So species can try to, well, it's not an active process, but they'll try to keep up with that. And they do that through dispersal. So the seeds, in the case of plants, the seeds get dispersed or cuttings get dispersed. The way that this study worked, looking at climate change impacts, was by using distribution models. And if I were to ask you why there's no swallow in, let's say, in Minnesota, your answer would probably be, anyone?
It's too cold.
It's too cold. That's right. Why are there no swallow in southern Florida, in the Keys?
Too wet.
Too wet. Okay. Interestingly enough, there is a large columnar cactus in the Florida Keys. It's almost completely extinct. But I've seen it and it's absolutely magnificent. But yeah, that's besides the point. But if instead of asking yourself those questions, if you let a computer answer those questions and assign numbers to the probabilities of surviving in a certain area with a certain temperature and so on, then you build a distribution. So the data I use are simply occurrences, where a species occurs, and then what the climate is there, or soils. And so let's say that you have a few points, like on the left-hand side here, then you could build a statistical model called a distribution model. And then with that model, if you feed it a different set of climatic conditions, you can project into the future how well that species would do in different areas with different climates. So that way you can project ranges across space and time if you have forecasts for future climate. And so again, the result was that 60% of species are projected to lose part of their range under climate change. And almost a quarter of species lose over 25% of their range. And that number gets much worse for some. And those results were pretty much the same when we were talking about 2050 versus 2070. So things will be happening quite rapidly, and that's becoming very clear to us right now. Honestly, the timing of this swallow mortality event is in a way a good thing, because it's drawing a lot of attention to this issue, and the quicker the better. So let's talk about the geographic patterns a little bit. So these are two sides of the same coin. On the left-hand side, you have different colors denoting how many species are gained or lost in a certain area due to climate change. And those are estimates, right? And on the right-hand side, it's that same map, but in terms of percentages. Like, for example, an increase by 20% in the number of species. And so all the blue colors indicate an increase in species richness, so a good thing, right? And all the yellows and browns and reds, those indicate a decrease in species richness. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is that the vast majority of the Americas is going to be experiencing a decrease in cactus richness, especially in centers of diversity, like Mexico, Brazil, some of the regions of the Andes, and species in the northern hemisphere tend to move further north. In the southern hemisphere, further south. And one pattern that you can particularly see in the Andes is that species will also move up slowly. So exactly what you would expect. Now, that big chunk of an increase in species richness in North America, it's good news, right? But unfortunately, there's not that many species to start with. And on top of that, we are averaging, these maps are averaged across all the possible scenarios that we looked at for how fast species can disperse. And if we're talking about saguaro, for example, it would be a very scary thing to see a population of saguaros move by a mile every year. So that's definitely not likely. These maps get a lot worse if you were to look at a scenario where there's no dispersal at all beyond their current range. And that's what we're most likely going to be seeing. For a lot of cactus species, their seeds are dispersed by ants and small organisms that don't move very far. And keeping up with suitable climate is just not going to be possible. By the way, if there's a question in the chat, I don't have that window open at the same time. So feel free to go ahead or have someone read it.
Okay, there hasn't been yet, but actually I have one. Well, I have two things. So with the increase in species richness, in theory, that's great, but also isn't there the phenomenon where as species move up, they're occupying a niche that was otherwise occupied by the original ones, and thereby kind of creating an extinction event for those species that originally occupied that space? Would you say that's true?
Typically, a rapid reshuffling of the species that occur in a certain area, like you're talking about, is going to end in less diversity than we start with. These models are just a starting point in the sense that it shows what will happen to individual species, or that we think will happen to individual species, but it doesn't show what will happen to plant communities across the Americas. An increase in species richness in some areas might temporarily be a good thing, or it might be a good thing for those specific species, but it likely won't be for all species around. Absolutely. Really, any sort of changes in plant and animal communities on this short of a time scale is a bad thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then my second question was for that band, particularly in South America and Florida, where it has the largest relative change in species richness percentage-wise, is there a certain quality in that habitat? Is it like humidity or just general wetness that is creating such a large phenomenon? Like, what about those particular spots yields that remarkable of a change?
It's a really good question. And I think you might be onto something there, that a lot of the areas that are showing a big decrease in species richness, according to these models, are in areas that tend to be a little wetter overall on an annual scale. So the Caribbean, parts of the Caribbean, Florida, parts of Brazil that are pretty funky. So yeah, not sure what's going on there. And these models are statistical, so they don't offer a biological explanation, but they're a good starting point to start looking at some of these possible hypotheses, these possible reasons for why this might be the case.
Thank you. Excuse me being hasty and being like, why haven't you done all the research? I think it's really fascinating.
Yeah. And I mean, it's urgent. So we need to get off of our butts. You're absolutely right. On top of that, when you look at these patterns of species richness for cacti and how those interact with human activities, we call it a human footprint, we see that human activity levels are higher in areas with high cactus richness. So not only is climate change going to be an issue in a lot of these areas, but there are also areas where there's a lot of human activity. And furthermore, it's especially the areas where we expect to see the biggest decreases in diversity due to climate change that we're also seeing high levels of human activity. So double whammy, not great. But regardless, climate change doesn't belong at the bottom of the list anymore. If it ever did, it belongs near the top. And we're starting to see that very rapidly. I've been involved for the past year with the Chilean cactus genus Poa, which is heavily threatened by poaching. And people doing field work there are seeing incredibly rapid collapses of entire populations, just entire mountainsides where there's no longer a living plant over the course of a few years. Oh, and we might start seeing that in areas like the Southwest as well. It is going to be too late for some of these species in the wild. There is no way around it. I don't like being a pessimist, but I do not think it's a good idea to keep being super optimistic and say that we still have time to do something. Because in a lot of cases, we do not, especially in the wild. So that's why we need a change in conservation approaches, in my opinion. These distribution models, they're easily scalable. So all I need is a little bit of data here and there. And I can just go sit behind my computer and not go outside in 110-degree heat and sip on a cold soda. And the only reason that's the case is because of occurrence databases. And so there's these large databases like the BN database run by the University of Arizona that have an enormous number of observations of where cacti occur. And that's something where everyone can help. And I'll get to that in a moment. But problematically,
there was a question.
Okay.
Sorry, there was a question in the chat. If you're
I can click
right
it.
now.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. I can just read it to you. Dave was asking, do you think animals who live in or on a saguaro would seek out either another or more saguaros to live in or on, or adapt to a new plant or area based on what you've been seeing with the data?
Yeah. That's a good question. So a lot of different species interact with saguaros in different ways. We're talking about hundreds of species. And for some of them, not many, I think, that relationship is what's called very specific. And so they're almost like, for some species where you have pollinators that can only pollinate that specific plant. I don't think that's the case for saguaro very often, but there's simply no way of knowing. I suspect that it will be difficult for some animals to switch to different organisms because there's not a lot of species out there here in the Southwest that look like saguaro, right? So it's definitely a cascade that we'll experience. It's not just going to be cacti affected by this, but everything that relies and interacts with cacti So, yeah, I don't have an answer, unfortunately. Yeah. On top of this, over a third of plant species are rare. And we do know that it tends to be the rare species that are disproportionately affected by climate change. And for many of those, there's simply not enough data out there to make these distribution models. So the next thing that I've been working on, let's see, is seeing if we could assess rare species, because that should be a top priority. Well, how could we do that? Can we maybe leverage the models for common species to assess rare species? Yes, but only if species that are closely related respond similarly to climate change. So perhaps there's a species that's rare. Well, let me just demonstrate it. A complicated looking evolutionary tree created by Peter Breslin and colleagues. He works at Tumamoc Hill here now in Tucson, but he did his degree at ASU. Great person, knows a lot about Baja. And these are all pretty much all pink ocean cacti. So the details of this tree don't really matter. So starting with this tree with 89 tips or taxa species, let's specifically look at this group over here. That group has common species in it, like Escobaria tuberculosa, photographed near Shafter, Texas. And that one is a common species. We'll have a lot of data for it. And it seems that it'll do quite well under climate change. It'll increase in range, according to our models. It's also not endangered. And there's also Coryphantha alversonii from Blythe, California here, where I took a picture. And that one, no big deal with climate change according to the models. It's also not threatened. But in that same group, very closely related, there is Escobaria robinsorum here from Douglas, Arizona. Already not doing too great over there because of the building of the border wall. But it's a very cryptic species. It's small. And even though I know exactly where it is, every time I go over there, I spent like half an hour trying to find it again. I should probably keep better coordinates. But yeah, that species, we can't model it. And it's also vulnerable, conservation-wise. And so we cleaned up this evolutionary tree a little bit and then looked to see if similar species respond the same way to climate change. And don't worry about the numbers, but for each of those bars, if it's red, it means it won't do well. And if it's green, it will do well, according to climate change. But unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be a evolutionary pattern. So closely related species do not necessarily respond the same way to climate change, or at least in this group. So that's something problematic as well. So we definitely need to figure out what exactly is causing different species to respond certain ways to climate change. We need to find a pattern because we're talking about so many species. So how do we approach conservation? Well, traditionally, conservation was really focused on in situ conservation, so conservation in the field. And we all want to see healthy populations in nature, right? That's, in a way, our ultimate goal. And ex situ conservation, so in cultivation or in zoos for animals, was typically more of a side project. It was only really done if necessary to support conservation in the wild, for example, capture and release, or getting certain species to reproduce in the wild or in captivity temporarily. And so it's really considered a separate activity, but with the same common goal, a viable population in nature. Ex situ conservation is often considered less important for that reason. And I can see that perspective. And so there's even a set of guidelines for when to use ex situ conservation here by the IUCN. You got to compile a status review, define the specific roles that you want ex situ conservation to play, what you need to do, if it's feasible, and if it is a risk, because you are taking organisms out of the wild, and then make a decision based on that. Unfortunately, in situ efforts are very costly, both in terms of time and money. It's not just a guy sitting in front of the computer. And those projects are very idiosyncratic. You can't use the same type of project to protect every species. And there's also a relatively high chance of failure, even if you do everything right. You look at Pima pineapple cactus, Coryphantha robusta-spina from Green Valley here. One study has looked at the likelihood of survival for transplanting. Plants that are put back out into the wild have a mortality rate of around 30% versus 2% for the control. So it's risky business. Okay, so let's look at these main categories of threats to cacti and see what they require. Well, when we're talking about development, agriculture, residential projects, energy production, transportation, anything that can be considered land use change. And that requires local to national intervention, really. So lobbying your local government to not approve certain projects or have them involve some type of relocation, that sort of stuff. And that's still one of the biggest threats of cacti. Here's a quote from a friend of mine. This is a picture from Aruba. If you look closely, there's a water park right through rare Pilosoceras, which is a columnar cactus, and mellow cactus habitat. That's what it looked like before in that area. And some programs really do help, like the Tucson Cactus and Succulent Society Cactus Rescue Program is really a model program for what all these societies that care can do. It takes a lot of work, but programs like this are really absolutely heartwarming. Next up, and this is where my talk differs a little bit from previous ones, is biological resource use. And that includes legal collection for cultural purposes, but also includes poaching. And to deal with those issues, that needs local intervention, but also international intervention. Up until a few weeks ago, I was, in the end, I just like growing cactus, right? That's really all I want to do, like be outside of my greenhouse. Not this time of year, but no. But I always thought that this poaching issue and the international illegal trade in succulents was really something that happened far away from home. So you'll hear a lot of these poached plants going to Asia, for example. So I didn't really think it was still happening in the US that much. Well, I am very wrong. When I started at the Desert Botanical Gardens, I was informed about the shipment of Ariocarpus cochubianus from San Luis Potosi that was confiscated in the US, at an airport. Very sad, but that happens once in a while. Probably the tip of the iceberg, but still not hitting that close to home. But then you start seeing pictures like this on social media from places like California. These are Astecium, and some of the Asteciums are on CITES 1, the most restrictive appendix. And they're still somehow, these decades-old plants are still somehow making it across the border and being used to promote business. This is from Instagram. Here's some pictures.
Mitch,
Yes.
Mitch, could you explain what the last plants, those were poached plants, how people can identify that the plants were taken out of the environment instead of raised from seed in a greenhouse?
Yeah, it's very difficult. For some groups of plants, it's really easy to do. And here's a good example on this slide. This is the genus Copiapoa. It's one that I'm very familiar with from my own research. And if you look at this picture on the left-hand side, and I don't know if I can do like a little laser pointer. I bet I can somewhere, but I'll just indicate it. That is a Copiapoa cinerea on the left-hand side there. being pictured at a nursery in California. And you can see kind of an indentation about 2/3 of the way up. And that's probably everything below that is grown in the wild. So you see damage from sandblasting just because of local weather. You'll see spines just gone. On some other plants, you can see shovel marks. You'll often see plants without roots. But it can be really hard. And it can be really easy when plants are smuggled to kind of launder them. They can be sent from habitat in Chile to Italy or to Greece first, where they don't check as carefully maybe, then sent to Italy, and then sent to the United States. In this case, that's probably what happened with some of these plants. But it can be really hard to tell. And so it's very difficult to stop these smuggling operations. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. This is just what I could show publicly because this was on social media. But this is still going on to this day in large commercial quantities. And so I would definitely encourage folks, when you're buying plants, ask questions. Oh, where do you get your materials from? And don't do it in a way that's accusatory, but just ask questions. We're all trying to learn, right? So I'll have another video later, but back to conservation. So often what makes this, you don't have to read all this text, but this is an example of a successful versus an unsuccessful conservation program. And in one case, the program was successful and the species survived. And in the other one, the species went extinct. The difference between those two projects was that in one, the successful project, there was informed leadership, there was accountability, and most importantly, decisions were made while there was still an opportunity. So when doing conservation, we always want more funding and we always want more research and evidence and information to make sure it's successful. But when you're working with so many species that are threatened, particularly due to climate change in this case, then we cannot afford to wait, even when information is imperfect. That's something I definitely want to emphasize. Again, many species need intervention and funding is insufficient. So where are some of the general areas where we can all contribute? Well, when I started with this research of climate change impacts on cacti, it turns out there's a lot of very limited information for a lot of other plant families with succulents, except for the agave family. There's quite a bit of data there, but for a lot of species, a lot of different plant families, we simply don't know anything about their distributions, or the data is not shared. So I would encourage you to use apps like iNaturalist. I'm trying to, if I get access to iNaturalist data, and I'm working on that right now, I could triple the number of species I can model. Just like that. The information exists, but it just needs to be shared. And so please do keep using citizen science efforts like iNaturalist. It is really, really helpful. Also the threat data. So a big part of what happens at the IUCN is called the red list. So the red list classifies species according to how well they're doing in the wild. So are they critically endangered, vulnerable, near threatened, least concern, and so on, or are they extinct? And so for cacti, as a proof of concept, the IUCN specialist group categorized pretty much every cactus species. But for some plant families, there's not a single one classified. So we need more of that information too. And if you contribute to databases like iNaturalist, we can do those types of analyses and we can categorize these species. And that will help us prioritize which species we really need to go after. But that problem, or that issue, the situation interacts with poaching as well. You want to share data to help conservation, but you also have to be careful because people might go out and poach plants, right? And so in some cases, we've gone too far to the other extreme. This is Pierre Brownia browniorum, and it was described, and the original describers did not want to share any of the information at all, period. Okay, to protect the plants, completely understandable. And here's a quote from a friend of mine. The issue of hiding location is something that needs to be evaluated. I understand that hiding helps prevent theft by collectors, but there's another side. Without knowing where the plants are, the government and scientists cannot make protection plans. And so this person rediscovered this where this species occurs. And what they noticed is, yep, they're not getting poached, but it's extremely threatened by mining and wind farms. Okay, climate change. Climate change, good luck. Unless we all want to install massive air conditioners in the desert. Not going to happen. We cannot just rely on in situ conservation. Climate change is really an international problem, and it requires international intervention. And the results are already happening, the results of not doing anything. So we need to take action now, or well, 30 years ago. And one thing that we can all really help with is trying to change the public perspective. So last year when this paper came out, I did an interview for CBS, and they posted it on YouTube, and these were some of the responses. And so in some cases, it's going to be hopeless to change the public's perspective, but more people are willing to listen than you might think, I found. So we just have to change this type of behavior. But it's not just what we can do. It's also what quote-unquote professionals can do. In situ conservation managers don't just need to protect where species are right now, but they also need to protect where species will be in the future. And so this is a Chilean genus of cactus I was talking about. And so with that genus, the workshop, which took place over the course of several weeks and included collaborators from like over 10 countries, even in that case, with all professionals, it was very difficult to convince folks, look, climate change is a real issue here for this specific genus. We are already seeing the effects. And I think a little bit of it is that it's really easy to see when development is threatening a species, right? Development goes up, all the plants are gone, or you see holes in the ground from poachers. But for climate change, it's harder to tell, right? Maybe a fire will come through, destroy a population. Was that fire due to climate change? Good question. No way to answer it. Or is a specific dry spell or a set of years in which it's really dry, is that due to climate change, or is that just a natural pattern? Really difficult to answer. But we're starting to hit tipping points like with swarm, where it's not just a gradual decline, but where we're hitting a certain threshold and things are happening very, very rapidly after that threshold is met. So we also need to protect where species will be. In situ conservation is no longer sufficient. This is Monbolea astavesii, and I wish I had a better picture, but I can't, because it is very likely to be extinct in the well, both in the wild and in cultivation. And it's one of few cactus species for which that's the case, surprisingly, given how threatened they are. But one problem with this species was that when it was discovered in Brazil, we knew it was going to be hit by land use change, by agriculture very quickly. But it's so difficult, even for organizations, botanical gardens, universities, to get permits to propagate some of these species, that in this case, the only known seeds that made it out of habitat of this specific species probably went across the border of England. And they were sent to a very serious cactus grower that had to be very quiet about the fact that they had them. And unfortunately, a hailstorm hit their greenhouse and killed all the plants. Now imagine if a permit had been issued, just a permit for one fruit. That would have been hundreds of individuals that could have grown from that single fruit. Ex situ conservation is also not just stuffing plants into a botanical garden. This is Ripsalis triangularis over on the right here. It's an epiphytic cactus, kind of. It's also lithophytic, which means it can grow in rocks as well. But for this species, it was described, and then it was grown in a botanical garden, and it was probably destroyed during World War II, and the natural population was also disappeared. And it was just rediscovered a while ago, and it's made its way into cultivation, and so it's doing okay. But just having plants in a botanical garden and not propagating them, kind of keeping them as museum pieces, it's not a good thing. Things can go wrong. This is not the only case where this has happened. I used to be into dinosaurs before I did cacti. That's why I moved to the US. And there's this dinosaur with a large sail on its back. If you've seen Jurassic Park 3, you'll know it. Spinosaurus. And it was originally discovered, I think it was Egypt. And the fossil went to Berlin and was completely destroyed in World War II. And so, of course, you can't really propagate a dinosaur fossil, but for plants, you definitely can. Controlled propagation is key when that's done. This is another possibly extinct cactus, Discocactus subterranea proliferans, also from Brazil. Gorgeous species, very fragrant flowers, always nocturnal, and they'll develop from nothing. You won't see the flower bud in the morning. And then late morning or like early afternoon, you'll start seeing it poke out. And then by like 6 or 7 o'clock, you'll smell it. You'll smell it before you see it. And the locality of this plant was completely wiped out by the expansion of the city. And plants did make it into cultivation. Once again, probably the seed was exported illegally. I'm not sure. It was a long time ago at this point. But the plant wasn't propagated in a controlled way. And so it's very likely that all we're left with now, it's already a rare plant in cultivation, is hybrids. I'm going to skip these quotes because they're a little bit too depressing. Propagation can also be collaborative. That's what I'm trying to say. That's something that I'm trying to do through my nursery. And other nurseries out there do the same thing as well. And some botanical gardens are very open to these collaborative projects. Others are not. Others do not want to do business or any sort of trading or projects with even with other botanical gardens. Kind of strange. But here are 2 critically endangered species from Brazil, and the seeds were exported properly. And the first seeds went to a seed bank. Then some of the other seeds went to different growers in the US, including myself. And so the first seedlings of those batches went to botanical gardens. And the project has been so successful that we're doing it again, a second round for Brazilian plants. It's been absolutely amazing. And then that way, some of these plants can also make it into the hands of very passionate growers. There's some folks now in Phoenix with these plants growing in their yards. And one example of why this is so important is this plant here on the right. This is Brighamia insignis. It's a succulent from Hawaii. It's either extinct in the wild or there's like one plant left or something like that. But you'll see it around at garden stores once in a while. And what happened with this specific plant is that they looked at the genetics, and some of the botanical gardens, I think mostly in Hawaii, that had these plants had specific evolutionary lineages, so specific parts of the family tree, different populations. And then they involved stakeholders in Europe, a large commercial nursery that already was growing those plants. And they looked at those plants, and that represented a completely different original population that only made it because it was also grown for horticulture. So considering all stakeholders can reduce poaching, can avoid extinction, it can fund conservation, and it can educate the public. So we need more of that. We need to collaborate. That includes native peoples, academics, botanic gardens, NGOs, industry, and horticulturalists. Industry and horticulturalists are actually recognized in CITES, so the big international treaty to protect fauna and flora. And the economic and recreational points of view are recognized in the preamble to CITES. But in reality, that's not the way things are handled. I call this the ivory tower of cactology. There's often a big disconnect, alienation, and even animosity between amateur botanists and horticulturalists and quote-unquote professionals. And I say quote-unquote because we all need to take each other seriously. The only way we're going to get anywhere is by listening to each other's perspectives. Because the amateurs have a wealth of data about how to grow certain plants, about where certain plants occur in the wild, just anecdotal information that can be incredibly valuable. And most, and I emphasize most, really do care about conservation. It's only a few bad apples nowadays that stand in the way of it. So we can also develop tools like Plant Search. And Plant Search is a database online where different botanical gardens can sign up and look to see what other botanical gardens have a certain plant. And they can exchange that way. Now, hopefully we'll end up with a tool where we can all do that with our backyards or cactus collections and so on, where we can all leverage these resources at the same time. Requires efforts from both parties, though. Something you'll hear a lot is complaints about taxonomy. It's like, oh, they're changing the names again. Well, there's a lot of work that goes into those research projects, and it's science. It's not always correct. We learn new things every day, but definitely try to appreciate academic efforts and conservation efforts and so on, because it's not just someone with a university degree saying it is so without looking at it in detail. Dealing with red tape is another issue. Here's some quotes. I'll just read one. They're so strict here when you import cacti, they actually see that if you can't show phytocertificates, all for protecting wild cacti. But that same department allows continuous destruction of our local cacti, condominiums we don't need. So it's got to such a point that even botanical gardens have stopped doing any sort of international trading with each other because they cannot get the permits needed. There's so much red tape involved, so much time and money they need to spend in order to do so anything international. And that affects private and commercial growers as well. And so simply because of the attention, sites like eBay and NCF kind of caught on and have started banning certain species of cacti simply because they're on a list, and the list doesn't always make sense. The list is typically political. For example, there's an exception for seeds of cactus species from Mexico specifically. And so ideally, these listings on CITES should be informed by biology, but often it's just what I call plant nationalism. And plant nationalism just makes conservation more difficult. I understand that certain species represent a cultural heritage, absolutely. But we can all work together, regardless of where we're from, to protect that cultural heritage and have us all enjoy the heritage. Plants know no borders, especially ones that are just drawn on a map randomly. And I say that as a former foreigner. We also need to redefine poaching. This right here, that's poaching. That's about 500 plants for commercial reasons, imported illegally. I'm not going to ask you to answer this question, but I bet the vast majority of folks here went out on a hike. They've tasted a little cactus fruit, right? Like they've pocketed one to eat or to even grow the seeds. Some of you have probably done it, like to grow like a specific tree or something like that from seeds. That is not the same as what you see in this picture over here at all. But technically, they're both poaching. This video came to me in the last couple of weeks, and I can't give too many details on it. It's cropped. But this is what the situation looks like for some African succulents. And these plants are making it into the US with falsified paperwork in some cases. Not that many of them, right? Decades old plants removed in massive quantities. So it's going to be a prickly future. Really, take-home messages are that now we can't be slow. There's always going to be uncertainty. We need to give everyone the tools to contribute. We have to get rid of the red tape and come up with common sense conservation approaches. And we need to involve all stakeholders and organizations like the Naturalist to provide leadership. There's a lot of plant lovers out there and a lot of different plant clubs, and I keep hearing about new ones. And there's so much we can do together. Yeah, we can educate, online resources on conservation, projects, and legislation. We need to work on enforcing ethics guidelines amongst members and societies. Research, filling data gaps, developing new tools so that the general public can contribute. Collaborate, not just each organization working separate. Like a botanical garden can work with another botanical garden, or with a private nursery, or with the government. Lobby for common sense, simple trade legislation that doesn't just make it impossible to do things in a legal way. And that's it. So a lot of folks I want to thank, a lot of different botanical gardens and societies. And I really enjoyed talking about conservation. And this is not a very formal talk, simply because I don't think that's needed. I think that we really all have the same goal in mind. And there's so much room for all of us to voice their opinions, and they're just all valid. So, upcoming, I'll be talking at the Huntington Botanical Gardens early September, and then somewhere in September, most likely I'll be speaking at the Tucson Botanical Gardens as well. A little bit of show and tell with endangered species, which I think is a really fun idea to kind of garner attention to conservation. So, and I'm happy to chat. I know I probably went a little bit over time, but yeah. So thank you.
Thank you. No, your timing was actually practically perfect. So I'm impressed by that. So I haven't seen any questions come up in the chat yet, but please, if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat and I will be happy to relay it. That was a lot of hard-hitting information. And thank you also for the saguaro census information. I've been seeing on a lot of Facebook groups like, oh, my saguaro, it's dying or it's losing its arms. And so being able to disseminate that information now and potentially help with that project, I think is really meaningful. And so that was something I didn't know about, and I'm glad to know about it now.
Yeah.
The information.
I assume saguaros in cultivation. Sorry.
I thought you were done. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
I'm happy to stay as long as you want. So
I just wanted to say that we'll put in the internal communications that goes out on Saturday, the information about the census. So people who couldn't make it here tonight, they have the information too.
thank you. That'll definitely help.
I have a question.
Yes.
I use iNaturalist to document things. I've only taken a couple of pictures of cactus, but I know there's one that says obscured. So does that, from what I've read, it sounded like the data can be given to scientists when it's obscured. It's just.
It's difficult.
Okay.
The problem is that individual contributors to iNaturalist can choose whether or not to obscure their data. That's level one. And then level two is that some of the higher up folks within iNaturalist can choose to obscure specific species. Unfortunately, there are definitely folks out there with an academic background that are also involved in poaching. Or folks hiding under the guise of conservation. It happens. So I'm understanding a little bit more why iNaturalist is careful about sharing their data. So what I would need to do in my case to get access to iNaturalist data, the obscured ones, is to approach each and every individual contributor and ask their permission. Now we're talking about thousands of people.
Yeah, wow. I didn't realize it was that level of interaction required to get access to that data.
Yeah, yeah. I haven't had much success yet. So the interaction, the actual social interaction takes up more time than the actual analyses, because by now I would have been already done, and we would have gone from 400 to 1,200 species at this point. So yeah, see another question here. Is it the physical act of mining that is the biggest threat, or is it the leaching of chemicals and the effect of groundwater that is worse? It's definitely both. The physical act of mining, that's easier to tell, because again, you see a plant just, being destroyed, versus seeing a population maybe be reduced a little bit less, or some plants dying. But yes, chemical leaching, agricultural runoff, those absolutely have effects, and they can cause a population to collapse entirely. And typically the leaching and runoff, those will have, on a geographic scale, a much more expansive effect than the actual act of mining. So, but yeah, definitely both. Yeah.
I just wanted to clarify for the census as well. You do mean for any cactus, like any saguaro anywhere within the region. So even if
Yes.
it's like center city, completely urban. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that definitely helps for Phoenix specifically. When we're talking about the urban centers, we're going to see the urban heat island effect. And so that information specifically, I think is very valuable in the sense that it can kind of serve as a model for how saguaros might respond in the wild a few years from now. So because it's
Okay.
already hotter in the city, right? Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Sorry if it was too depressing, but
Absolutely needed. I really appreciate your talk. We're like falling around like a dead show. This is the second time it's
well, I put my email address in the chat. If anyone wants to reach out by email or so, feel free. I'm always happy to talk. So yeah. Thank you.
All right. Thank you as well. And then thank you for what you do. I think it's really great work, and I appreciate all your efforts, especially having so many models, like 400. That's crazy.
It sounds a lot, but it's pretty much fully automated at this point. And I do it. I can only do it because people care. If nobody were to care, I would just get very disillusioned very quickly, and I wouldn't keep doing this. I'd just grow cactus in my backyard. So it's only because folks like a master naturalist care that I keep doing this. That support is absolutely crucial. So thank you.
Of course, I will be the hype man behind the project any day. All right. Well, have a wonderful rest of your evening, Paige. Thank you again.
Thank you.
So Jess, do we have any chapter business?
Sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing you. It's a little like